Welcome to Rising Up for Justice, a special weekly series presented by Rising Up with Sonali, an independently produced, subscriber-supported program syndicated to radio stations, free speech, TV, and podcast platforms. I'm Sonali Kohatkar, host and executive producer. Our nation and our world are overrun by billionaires and bigots, but they are few and we are many. On this new series, exclusive to subscribers of Rising Up with Sonali and viewers of Free Speech TV, we'll hear from organizers in the movements for social justice, and we'll dig into the nuts and bolts of values, strategies, tactics, narratives, and building power. This week on Rising Up for Justice, Medea Benjamin, one of the co-founders of CODEPINK, joins me. Medea has also co-founded Global Exchange and several key anti-war initiatives, including the Peace in Ukraine Coalition and Unfreeze Afghanistan. With 50 years of experience, she's recognized as one of the nation's most committed fighters for human rights. Welcome to the program, Medea.
Hey, Sonali. Always a pleasure to be with you.
So first, let's talk about the organization's origins. You and I have spoken so many times over the years about the current work that CODEPINK is doing. Often it's anti-war work. But this conversation seeks to look at the organization in its entirety. And I remember when CODEPINK was founded, because I've been doing this long enough, and I remember there was a time when it was called CODEPINK Women for Peace or something to that effect when it was first founded?
Yes, well, I go back more than you do, Sonali, but you do go back to the time of the 9/11 attacks. And that was really the origin of CODEPINK, where there was that George Bush color-coded alert system that, of course, young people don't know, but there was that yellow, orange, red alert to keep people constantly in the state of fear and to justify the unprovoked war in Iraq and justify the invasion of Afghanistan. And we came together as a group of women. We were originally an environmental group that came together, and it was during this conference we had that we were talking about the pending wars and saying, you know, we got to do something about it, and maybe we should come up with our own color-coded alert. And that's when we came up with a code hot pink, because we were just not pink, we were a hot pink. But that was a URL that was taken by a porn site. So we couldn't be hot pink, and we became CODEPINK.
And CODEPINK's original goal was basically opposing those wars that were launched in the wake of the September 11th attacks. Is that still its major goal? And of course, you and I are speaking at a time when the U.S. is engaged in at least one, potentially two or three wars, depending upon how you define what Trump is doing. Is a general organizing for peace and justice globally still CODEPINK's main purview?
Well, yes, and you'll remember in those days of the Iraq War, we thought if we did our job as citizens and we mobilized and we organized, which we did, we had hundreds of thousands of people out in the street and people all over the world, that we could have stopped that war. Unfortunately, we couldn't stop it. And we've been trying to stop wars ever since and move the money. And it's so sad to think that after all of this work, we have over $1 trillion that we're robbing from the people to put into these war machines that are blowing things up now all over the place. And to see this new war in Iran, it feels like deja vu all over again, when we were lied to about getting into that war. And at least at that time, there was a buildup and there was time for us to build up a movement. This time it came so quickly that we haven't had the same chance. But yes, CODEPINK for the last over 20 years has been trying to stop wars and put our money into the needs of the people and the climate.
And how do you go about organizing around those goals? You're in the U.S. Senate right now, and I've spoken to you previously from government buildings where you often have shown up to meet with elected officials. What are the ways in which CODEPINK is going about achieving those goals?
Well, over the years, we've been focusing on companies that are involved in profiting from war, We've been part of the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement about Israel. We have been trying to change U.S. government policy. We put a lot of our efforts into educating people. I've written many books, but CODEPINK is always educating people, creating chapters. And in this last year, we have built up lots of chapters all over the country. We used to have many of them around the Iraq War time, and then they faded away. We kept going, but a lot of the chapters started working on environmental issues, which are so important. And now during the genocide in Gaza, we've built up our chapters again. And those chapters do a lot of different things locally, depending on what they feel as a chapter that is the most important for them. But between trying to put pressure on companies, on elected officials, passing local resolutions, getting our cities to divest from the war machine, and building up a peace economy, we've been very busy over these past 2 decades.
And I do want to ask you about this idea of a peace economy. But in general, it sounds as though there are efforts to educate the public through, various ways, including the books that you've written, but then also very directly push elected officials to do the right thing and lobby members of Congress or even local officials.
Yes, I am based in Washington, D.C. In fact, I moved here just over 20 years ago, precisely because of the war in Iraq. And of course, my children were grown, so I had the possibility of moving. But when I'm in D.C., I'm part of a group that comes here, a CODEPINK group, every single week. And we are focusing on different issues. Sometimes it's around Latin America and this new Monroe Doctrine of trying to be the hegemon in invading countries like Venezuela and now the threats on Cuba. Sometimes we're focusing on Gaza or the West Bank. We also have been pushing to stop the Israeli bombings of Lebanon. And now with the new war in Iran, we've been pushing around the War Powers Act to stop the president from going ahead with this unprovoked war that has not gotten congressional approval, which according to the Constitution, it must. So we take on these different issues. We also focus on individuals. Sometimes there are people like in the Palestine activist community who have been picked up by ICE merely for their activism. We've been working on the case of Laka Cordia, who just was released after almost an entire year in detention. So we work on a number of those cases, as well as individual cases of political prisoners in other countries. We're constantly being asked by our friends in places like Saudi Arabia or the United Arab Emirates, or even places in Latin America, telling us that so-and-so was jailed because of their political activities. Could we help to put pressure to get them released? And then also, it being in Washington, D.C., we do a lot of protests and sometimes positive rallying at embassies. We have been protesting the war in Sudan and going to the Sudanese embassy. We have been doing cultural events with the Cubans at the Cuban embassy. We are constantly going to the embassy of Israel. In fact, we were part of a camp out outside that embassy that went on for months and months. So unfortunately, being here in DC, there are constantly issues and people and countries that need to be pressured. And we have been doing that as CODEPINK and as part of a larger community. And that's one thing I really enjoy about CODEPINK is our ability to work with many different organizations whom we might not agree with 100% on all kinds of things, but we come together about issues that we do agree on.
And I definitely want to ask you about some of those allied organizations later. But staying on how Code Pink does its work, what are the ways in which people can set up local chapters if there are some, if there are folks who want to get involved, particularly now as the US is in the middle of this war with Iran looking to invade Cuba potentially, and of course has already engaged in regime change in Venezuela. As there are people who are realizing that this might be an arena where they could actually do some good and want to start their own local Code Pink chapter. How would they go about doing it?
We have staff members at Code Pink divided across the different areas of the country, and they become like the mentors for a local group to form. They work with them, they give them the rules for being a Code Pink member. They send them a kit that has Code Pink materials like t-shirts and bumper stickers and stickers, and hook them up with other chapters in their region, and then they get together and think of the things they want to do. Some Code Pink groups might decide that they want to try to get their local city or their university to divest from the war machine. Some of them might want to be involved in things like mutual aid in their neighborhoods, which is part of building a peace economy. Some of them want to have film showings or read books together. Uh, uh, it's really according to what the local group wants to do. And many of our chapters, because the military industrial complex is so spread out across the United States, have companies right in their cities that are involved in the war machine. And so they can focus on those companies as well.
Let's talk about what you mean by the peace economy. Is that a way to link up the global injustices that the US leads with impacts on local communities? Because, of course, the more money we spend on war, the less there is to spend on the things that keep us safe, that really keep us safe.
Absolutely. And I think we see these days when there have been such great communities coming together to protest ICE and try to protect their brothers and sisters in the immigrant community. We see this outpouring of mutual aid, of people coming to the support of those communities. And this is part of what we've been building up for many years now, encouraging people to be involved in their local activities and encouraging them to know their neighborhood groups, encouraging them to learn about or to create their own peace economies in their community. We in Washington, D.C., for example, are divided into small groups, in neighborhood groups, and we are constantly working with each other about who needs childcare, who can go to pick up something when somebody is sick. Really just getting down to the basics of how do we help each other? How do we create more webs within our communities where we're looking out for each other? Our government doesn't do a very good job of doing that. And so we have to step in to do that and build the kinds of communities that we want to live in.
What are the ways in which Code Pink engages in storytelling and narrative work? Because it seems as though these days that is such an important part of the work that social justice organizations do, right? To sort of get public buy-in for the values, for the work that the organizations do, because we live in a nation where, and at a time when information and the spread of information and the wielding of information is so powerful. So is that something that Code Pink works on? I mean, of course, you do a lot of branding with the color pink, which is a color traditionally associated with peace, which I imagine is part of the storytelling that you do.
Yes, I think a lot of our work is about storytelling because we know that people are numbed by statistics. So the storytelling comes in many different ways. We encourage people who are members of Code Pink to tell their stories about how they got involved, why they care about building a peaceful world, what it is that brought them to that. We try to tell the stories of people in other countries, whether it's people in Cuba who are being affected by this brutal siege that they're under, or the people in Gaza. When we do alerts to our community members, we try to do it through telling the stories of individuals. We also want to tell the stories of the people who are profiting from these wars. We oftentimes talk about the women who are now the heads of these military companies, and um, why we have to be pushing these women to uh, examine what they are doing and why they're doing it, and what are the values that they should hold dear. So storytelling is very much a part, and you said the color, which in itself is part of storytelling, but we also try to have activities that are full of joy, even in these very dark times. We encourage people to come together and share their stories with each other. We also do a lot of writing. I mean, writing books, writing articles, and certainly in those kinds of venues, we tell our stories. And one thing that I try to do in Congress is to tell the stories about who are the people that are representing us. And sometimes they're good stories of people who care and are doing the right thing. But unfortunately, most of the time, there are stories of people who are in the pocket of lobby groups, who are more concerned about pleasing their donors than they are about keeping us out of wars. And people are often shocked by the videos that we put on, is as we try to talk to these members of Congress, just to see how callous they are, how uncaring they are about all the children who were killed in Gaza, the children who were killed on the first day of the U.S. war on Iran. So these are stories that we think are so important for the American people to learn about. And I must say, Sonali, that we have opened the eyes of so many people in this country and around the world that tell us that they had no idea how bad so many members of our Congress are. And that is thanks to the storytelling.
Right, that's a signature of Code Pink. And those videos are available all over Code Pink social media, where you and other members of Code Pink often very politely question your representatives, but of course not backing down in the face of truth. And often you are very rudely dismissed, sometimes even physically handled or manhandled, which has been quite
And accused
instructive.
of being paid for by the Chinese Communist Party. And one senator just asked me, got very close to my face and said, "Are you a citizen of Iran?"
Wow.
And sometimes they accuse us of being, whoever the boogeyman is of the day. But yes, it's part of this trying to dismiss people who are telling the truth, who are pushing to keep the US out of these wars. And we have so many members of Congress, as you know, Sadali, who not only are getting money from big lobby groups like the pro-Israel lobby group, but also from the weapons companies. And you see their mark here in that there are constantly lobbyists for the weapons companies that are in Congress. There are more lobbyists for the weapons company than there are members of Congress. So it's so important that we counter this behemoth that has really taken control of our foreign policy.
And so, what are the main challenges or the biggest challenges facing Code Pink? I mean, obviously, pouring money into war is a challenge facing the entire nation. But in terms of Code Pink's approach to global peace and justice, what stands in your way the most in terms of achieving your goals?
I think that the war machine is more potent than we even realized, because we thought that maybe year after year working in coalition, we could push to reduce the Pentagon budget and put that money into the people's needs, since that is something that the people want. But over the years, we've seen that certainly in the last couple of years, enormous increase in the military budget. And you see even Democrats who supposedly oppose these wars, when it comes to giving more money to the Pentagon, they usually roll over and do that. So I would say the biggest obstacle is to try to get a handle on how can we take money back from this war machine and put it into all of the things that would make our lives so much better. And I also think that the climate issue has lost a lot of its um, organizing ability over the last few years. That we used to be able to hook up with the climate groups, and they were quite large and would be able to turn out lots of people. And I think they have suffered over these last years. I think another problem is the fear factor, people feeling afraid to come out to protest, and rightly so, with ICE and with this administration carrying out witch hunts. The fear factor keeps people away from being as active as they would like to be. You know, Sonali, that whenever wars start, there is so much propaganda. And if people get their news from the mainstream media, they are really being bombarded with lies constantly, like in the case of Iran, saying that Iran was an imminent threat to the United States, saying that we are winning this war, that we won on day one, but let's keep going and just keep winning. I mean, these crazy things that people are being fed.
And that also brings me to the question of media coverage in general. Does mainstream corporate media coverage of CODEPINK's work and the truth of war, does that also present a big obstacle? Because so much of that shapes public opinion, although, of course, the media is very much unpopular these days as more and more people don't trust it. But wouldn't accurate media coverage of the issues and also of CODEPINK's work benefit the movement in general?
Absolutely, but we have such a hard time getting covered by the corporate media. And if we do get covered, it's usually in a very negative way, with lies like saying we're funded by some a foreign government. So it is very hard to get coverage in the media that is not slanted like that. And we used to get a lot more coverage. You remember, Sonali, in the days of the Iraq War, it was easier to get on things like CNN and MSNBC. But these days, it's pretty much impossible. And luckily, especially for the younger generation, they're getting their news from other sources. So in that sense, CODEPINK has been growing a lot. And we are recognized not only nationally, but internationally. As we travel around, we are constantly getting people coming and thanking us for our work because they see us now on social media. So at least we have that, given the impossibility of getting covered by the corporate media.
Right. And so, what are some of the organizations that CODEPINK allies with? You mentioned that you do work with a lot of organizations. I understand that maybe climate justice organizations aren't as well equipped, maybe, to work with you as they used to be. But where does CODEPINK fit in the universe of social justice organizations?
Well, the climate groups are coming back now to the issue of war, especially with Iran, and seeing the literal explosions of fuel tanks and the constant bombing, and what is this doing to the environment and the people in Iran, and now the people in the region. And of course, some of them got involved around the Gaza issue to say that genocide is also ecocide. So we do continue to work with the environmental community. In fact, we have a campaign called War is Not Green, and have been working with environmental groups for quite a long time now. In the ecosystem, we work with women's organizations. We work with other peace groups because there are quite a number of peace groups like Veterans for Peace. We have been working with the group Peace Action, the Quakers, the Friends Committee on National Legislation. We have weekly meetings with groups that are involved around the Palestine issue, and there's about 60 different organizations on there. We have a campaign around China called China's Not Our Enemy, and work with a number of different organizations, particularly in Asia and Pacific, to try to build up more cooperation and education about China. So those are some of the groups we work with. But I think every staff person at CODEPINK who is involved in the campaign has their own ecosystem of groups that they work.
And then finally, Medea, what do you need from progressive-minded people who want to support CODEPINK's work? What are ways in which people can get directly involved? I know we talked already about how folks can start their own local chapters, but if there's folks who just want to either financially support or sign up for alerts and, echo your work or share it, what are ways in which they can do that?
Yes, you can go to codepink.org or look up us up on any of the social media sites. Some people say, oh, petitions don't do anything. With us, they do, because we hand deliver them and we make a campaign out of it. And so we've had a lot of success on some of the campaigns that people have signed on to. So we encourage them to do that. Certainly, you don't even have to be a chapter to join in our regular webinars. We have education, we have book clubs that people read books together, and we also travel together. We are leaving on this weekend to go to Cuba, and we have 150 people that are going with us on this trip, which is very exciting. So there are many ways to get involved in CODEPINK, and the best way is just to sign up first at codepink.org.
Well, Medea, I want to thank you so much for joining us and for all the work you do. Good luck on your trip to Cuba.
Thank you so much for having me on. It's great to talk to you, Sonali.
Thank you so much. My guest has been Medea Benjamin, one of the co-founders of CODEPINK, and this is Rising Up for Justice. I'm Sonali Kolhatkar, host and executive producer of this new weekly half-hour series, exclusive to viewers of Free Speech TV and subscribers of my long-standing program, Rising Up with Sonali. Find out more at risingupwithsonali.com.